I am Daniel Carter, 46 years old, and that night I pushed through the heavy double doors of my parents' Tudor mansion in Bellevue, drenched from head to toe. The March rain hadn't spared me. Water ran down my hair, soaked into my worn-out suit until the fabric clung to my skin. They say rain can wash you clean. For me, it only made the cold and humiliation sink deeper as I stepped inside that house. The grand hall glowed under the crystal chandelier, its light bouncing across polished marble floors. Mozart floated from a live orchestra in the corner, drowned out by laughter in the clink of champagne glasses. It wasn't a wedding or a birthday. Tonight was a family celebration, honoring the luxury world tour my parents had just gifted my youngest brother Ethan and his new fiancée. Maldives, Santorini, Kyoto. 3 dream destinations, as Ethan bragged to anyone willing to listen. $300,000, all prepaid, non-refundable. I stood at the doorway, dripping and shivering, a stark contrast to the guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits. A few eyes flicked my way. Whispers rippled through the crowd, followed by crooked smiles. Some probably thought I was lost. Others, that I had come to spoil their party. My mother, Margaret, was the first to approach. She wore a turquoise satin gown, pearls glittering at her neck. Her smile faltered the moment she saw me, like she had spotted a stain on her perfect tablecloth. My father, Richard, trailed behind her, adjusting his tie with a frown. "Daniel," my mother hissed through clenched teeth, "please don't make a scene. We have guests." I didn't have the strength for pleasantries. "Caleb," I rasped, "my son. He collapsed at school today. The doctor says it's a congenital heart defect. If he doesn't have surgery within 48 hours, he will—" My voice broke. I couldn't force out the last words. Behind me, the orchestra faltered for a single beat, then picked it up again as if nothing had happened. My father squinted. "What did the doctor say?" $60,000, I begged, up front, before the hospital will schedule the operation. My insurance expired when work fell through. I tried the bank, but they want collateral. I have nothing left. Please help me save Caleb. He's your grandson, too. The room seemed to sink as I dropped to my knees. I, the eldest son who once swore never to bow in front of my parents, now knelt on the cold marble floor. I clutched the silk of my mother's sleeve, desperate. She stayed quiet, then turned to my father. Between them passed that familiar look of silent agreement, the one I had never been included in. "We can't, Daniel," she finally sighed, hand pressed against her chest as though her heart ached too. "Blake's wedding? No, Ethan's honeymoon. We already spent the $300,000. Non-refundable." I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Ethan stepped forward just then, champagne glittering in his hand. His tuxedo fit like it was sculpted for him. His smile polished like a toothpaste ad. "God, big brother, you really picked tonight to stage your tragedy." He sipped his drink, stretching his voice so the whole room could hear. "Maybe you should learn to manage money instead of begging like the party crasher you are. Some of us in this family actually plan for the future." Laughter rippled through the crowd. A few guests shrugged, as if enjoying an extra round of entertainment. Heat rushed to my face, though I couldn't tell if it was anger or shame. My father checked his watch, his frown deepening into hard lines. "Daniel, you should go. Handle your own problems. Everyone is responsible for their own choices." In that moment, I heard no music, saw no chandelier, only the image of Caleb in a hospital bed, oxygen mask rising and falling with fragile breaths. And the truth crashed down on me. My parents, who owned mansions and fat investment accounts, had chosen Ethan's luxury vacation over their only grandson's life. Slowly I stood. The crowd parted, whispers trailing behind me. Failure. Embarrassment. The front doors opened, wind and rain slapping my face. I turned back once, looked at the glittering lights and polished faces, and whispered, not to them, but to myself. They say rain washes away shame. But that night, all it did was glue my old suit tighter to my skin. As I walked out of the house I could no longer call home. I pulled the door shut, letting the music and laughter sink into the dark. If you've ever been betrayed by your own blood, tell me where you're watching from. Texas, Florida, New York, anywhere in the world. I want to hear your story. I drove my old pickup through sheets of rain, wipers working full speed but still failing to clear the water, blurring my vision. That night, Seattle felt colder than usual. I pulled into the hospital lot, hands trembling from the chill and from fear. Caleb was somewhere up on the fourth floor, his small heart ready to betray him at any moment. I gripped the wheel tighter, my mind blank except for one question. How do I find $60,000 in 2 days? The next morning, I began the chain of calls that still makes my throat ache when I think back. First was the bank. I sat in a waiting room that smelled of weak coffee and overheated printers, across from a young man with hair slicked back like a showroom dummy. I explained everything, my voice cracking into a plea. He typed a few words, looked up, and said flatly, "I'm sorry, sir, your credit record doesn't qualify. Without collateral, we can't process the loan." I remember repeating over and over, "This is my child's life. He's only 7 years old." But all I got was a shake of the head and a hollow, practiced smile. Next was the insurance company. I called the hotline, waited through hold music and endless loops of "Your call is very important to us." When someone finally answered, I nearly shouted, "Tell me there's a way to reactivate my policy. I can prepay, I can catch up, whatever it takes." The agent's voice was steady, robotic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. Your policy expired. Renewal fees only apply at the start of next month. The system won't allow changes." The system. My son was dying, and everything came down to those two words. I tried a few old friends, colleagues who once toasted with me when the company was thriving. They offered the same line. "I'm really sorry, Danny. Things are tough for us too." Then hung up quickly, afraid I'd ask for more. Silence filled the phone again, leaving only the pounding of my own heart. That night, Rachel sat across from me at the kitchen table. Her brown hair hung loose, her eyes red from crying. She slid a set of old keys toward me. "The Mustang," she whispered. "We'll sell it." I stared at her, thinking I had misheard. "That car is your youth. You spent 10 years restoring it with me. You remember the nights you polished every piece of chrome." Rachel gave me a weak smile, resting her calloused hand over mine. "I love that car, but I love Caleb more. The car is not our future. Our son is." The next morning, a man came to see it. He inspected every detail, slid into the driver's seat, then offered less than I had hoped. I wanted to scream at him, tell him every bolt and scrap of leather carried our sweat and our memories. But I swallowed it, signed the papers, and took the $8,000 check. I had never felt so poor while holding a piece of paper worth more than my entire bank account. But 8,000 was nothing against 60. I sat by Caleb's bed, watching the tube flutter with each shallow breath. I felt like a father stripped of purpose, unable to shield his own child from death. On Monday morning, just as I braced for another rejection, the hospital door swung open. Standing there were Tom and Linda Harris, my in-laws. Tom wore his faded Carhartt jacket and a frayed cap, and Linda carried a leather bag worn from decades of use. I stammered, "How did you know?" Linda gripped Rachel's hand. "Did you think we wouldn't hear? A neighbor called us. Caleb is our grandson." Tom sank into a chair, twisting his cap in his rough hands. "I sold the lake cabin," he said haltingly. My breath caught. That cabin was their retirement dream, the place Tom had built with his own hands 20 years ago. Summers fishing, campfires, and Caleb running along the shore. "You can't," I said. "That cabin is everything to you." Tom looked at me with dark brown eyes, the same as Rachel's. "No, Daniel. Family is everything. Everything." Linda opened her bag and placed a thick envelope on the table. 38,000. "With what you already have, it should be enough." Tears broke loose, hot against my sleepless skin. I clutched their hands, choking on the only words I had. "Thank you." The surgery took place the next morning. The hospital hallway stretched cold and endless, reeking of disinfectant. Rachel, her parents, and I sat in the waiting room, counting each minute. Linda kept handing us cups of coffee, and Tom stared at the wall, his hands trembling but steady with resolve. Every door creak made my chest seize. 12 hours later, Dr. Levine appeared. His face looked tired, but his eyes were bright. The surgery went well. Caleb will recover. My legs gave out as I sank into a chair, every bone drained. Rachel sobbed into her hands, and Tom and Linda wiped their eyes. In that moment, I knew I had lost one thing, the illusion of blood loyalty, but I had gained everything that mattered. my son's life, and the true meaning of family. I walked to the window. The rain had stopped. Seattle glowed under the golden streetlights. I drew a deep breath, empty and full all at once, and I swore to myself, each word etched into my bones. From this day forward, I will never beg again. I will build, and they will be forced to look up. After the surgery, the first few days felt like a hazy dream. I spent hours by Caleb's bedside, watching each steady breath beneath a dark red scar that stretched across his chest. Every time the monitor beeped slow and steady, it felt like blood was pumping back into my own heart. But as my son began to recover, reality came knocking again. Bills piled up, savings vanished, and my old job at the architecture firm was gone. I still remember the morning I went back to that office after 2 months away. I wore a white shirt that had started to fade, hoping there was still a place for me. The secretary just shook her head. "Mr. Summers wants to speak to you directly." I stepped into his office. The director, the same man who once raised a glass with me over countless projects, didn't even look up. "Daniel," he said, "we had to replace your position. Projects don't wait. You understand?" I opened my mouth to argue, but he slid a thin envelope across the desk. "Severance pay. Good luck." Just like that, one careless sentence erased nearly a decade of work. In the weeks that followed, I took whatever jobs I could find. First fixing a client's leaky roof, then sketching a remodel for a small coffee shop on Capitol Hill. Some nights, I painted walls or hauled bricks just to cover the mess to get back to the hospital. I told myself a kitchen studio is still a studio. People build empires from their garages. Why couldn't I start at the kitchen table? Rachel never once complained. She sat in the corner of that kitchen, balancing the bills while whispering encouragement. "Daniel, you have an eye for space. Clients will see it one day." I didn't know if I believed her, but the look in her eyes kept me moving forward. One afternoon, while I was hunched over sketches for a bakery, an old friend called. "Daniel, there's a boutique hotel project in Portland up for bid. They're looking for something warm, human. I think you'd be perfect. Want to try?" I almost laughed. "Hi, the guy who tiled a bathroom last week, am bidding on a hotel." But my friend's voice was steady. "What do you have to lose?" Weeks later, I found myself in a gleaming Portland conference room. 5 firms were invited. I was the only one without a flashy logo on my slides. I had a handful of large paper drawings, a borrowed projector, and the dark circles under my eyes. When my turn came, a familiar voice cut through. Gregory Shaw, an old colleague from the firm, smirked. "Well, if it isn't Daniel Carter, I hear you're running a kitchen studio now. Truly inspiring entrepreneurship." Laughter rippled across the room. My face burned, but instead of snapping back, I paused, drew in a breath, and looked straight at the board. "Yes," I said. "My studio started in the small kitchen of a rented apartment, but the reason I'm here is not to prove the size of my office. It's to talk about the spaces people really need." I pulled down the largest drawing, honeymoon shelter drawing, a design of the lake cabin Tom and Linda had sold to save Caleb. This was where my in-laws spent their lives. When they sacrificed it for their grandson, I knew I owed them something. So I redesigned a home for them. Not lavish, but every detail rooted in memory. A window facing the sunrise Linda loved to read by. A wide porch where Tom could fish. A kitchen big enough for the whole family to cook together. The room went quiet. A few judges leaned in, their expressions softening. I pressed on. A hotel is the same. It isn't just a place to sleep. It's where people live through milestones, honeymoons, reunions, sometimes even goodbyes. I want to create a space that makes every guest feel valued, like it's their own home. Gregory tried to interrupt, but one of the directors raised a hand to silence him. I ended with a steady voice. My kitchen studio doesn't have a grand logo, but it has heart. And sometimes that's what multi-million-dollar designs are missing. When I left the room, my legs were weak. Rachel squeezed my hand in the hallway, whispering, "You spoke with truth. They'll remember." I nodded, half believing, half doubting. A week later, the phone rang while I was painting a storefront door. "Mr. Carter," the woman's voice carried through, "the board has chosen your proposal for the boutique hotel project. Congratulations." I sank to the floor, the paint roller slipping from my hands. Tears and sweat blurred together. Rachel rushed over. I handed her the phone, and we collapsed into each other, crying with relief. That contract wasn't just money. It was my ticket back into the game. I registered the business, carved a small wooden sign that read Carter Design Studio, and hung it on the kitchen wall, my very first office. That night, with Caleb asleep, I sat at the kitchen table under the warm glow of the desk lamp, sketching the next design. Beside me lay the photo of the old cabin, now only a memory, and the smile of Tom and Linda the day I promised to repay them. The flame of my career, once extinguished, burned bright again. From this small kitchen, I swore I would build something greater than any mansion my parents had ever paraded. Carter Design Studio began on a particle board kitchen table stained with coffee rings, but before long, it had taken over our entire apartment. Oversized drawings covered the living room, tile samples, and fabric swatches piled up on the sofa, and Caleb sat right in the middle with his Legos, proudly saying he was designing with Dad. I picked up more projects, from family diners to a used bookstore in Ballard. At first, Rachel just helped me balance a few bills, but soon she was handling all the books, managing cash flow, and negotiating with suppliers. I used to joke, "You're the CFO of Carter Design Studio." Rachel would shrug. "If nobody watches the till, this company will die in 3 months." She wasn't joking. Rachel turned numbers into a compass, steering me away from cliffs I couldn't see. The boutique hotel project in Portland became our launch pad. When it opened, a travel magazine called it a place that feels like home. Other jobs followed. First, an Italian restaurant renovation, then a community center in Tacoma. I realized I couldn't do it alone anymore. So I hired my first employee, a young architecture graduate named Lisa, eyes bright with ideas. Then came Mark, a structural engineer out of work for half a year. We moved into a small office above the Seattle waterfront. It was no bigger than a living room, but to me it was proof that Carter Design Studio was no longer just a kitchen outfit. The day Lisa signed her contract, I remember sitting across from her, hesitant. I didn't want new hires to feel the same fear my family once lived through. I told her plainly, "I can't promise much, but health insurance starts on your first day." Lisa's eyes widened. "Really? I've heard small firms can't afford that." I nodded. "This isn't an expense, this is a promise." I thought of that night in the hospital, the oxygen tube on Caleb's chest. I swore that anyone who joined my company would never have to wonder if their child might die over a medical bill. When word spread, some in the industry laughed. They called me naive, said I was burning money. But I looked at Rachel, then at the faint pink scar on Caleb's chest whenever his t-shirt slipped as he ran. I knew some costs were never losses. The studio slowly built a reputation thanks to our unusual policies and the way we listened to clients. Reporters started noticing. A journalist from the Seattle Times came by, writing a piece titled, "An Architect Who Built a Company on Gratitude." They mentioned Tom and Linda's lake cabin, Caleb's heart surgery, and how a working-class family saved a company still in its cradle. I wasn't ashamed to share that story. I wanted people to know the foundation of Carter Design Studio wasn't concrete or steel, but love. After the article, more clients came. A school asked me to redesign its library. A nursing home wanted me to reimagine its gathering spaces. They told me, "We want warmth, not just four walls." I understood because I, too, had once sat in cold rooms praying for a spark of comfort. As work grew busier, Caleb healed day by day. The scar that was once raw red softened into a pink seam, like stitches on a worn shirt. Each morning he ran around the drafting table laughing, lifting his shirt proudly. "This is my superhero, Mark. I'm the real Iron Man." His words made me laugh and choke up at the same time. Tom and Linda visited often, sometimes bringing food. They sat in the small office, watching us work, smiling with pride. Tom would joke, "Traded the old cabin for a new empire, huh, Daniel?" I just shook his hand and squeezed hard. Some late nights, after everyone had gone, I stayed behind. The office fell silent except for the fan. I looked around at the drawings on the walls, the battered desks, the Carter Design Studio logo printed in black ink on cardboard Rachel had cut by hand. I remembered the day I was thrown out of my old firm with nothing but a severance envelope. I remembered the night in the rain, kneeling in front of my parents. Then I looked at where I stood now. I wasn't anyone important yet, But at least I had a place, a team that believed in me, and a family that never abandoned me. I raised my eyes to Caleb's photo on the desk, his smile wide as he held up a Lego model of a hotel he had built himself. I thought to myself, out of ashes, sometimes the brightest flames rise, and my flame, lit by love, by loss, and by a promise, will never go out. One autumn morning, the phone rang while I was measuring for a community center project in Tacoma. The voice on the other end was polite but firm. Mr. Carter, we represent Westbrook Hotels. They're seeking a partner to redesign their entire chain along the West Coast. Contract value, several $1,000,000. We'd like to know if Carter Design Studio is interested. I sat down hard on the unfinished concrete steps, my heart pounding. Around me was a temporary office made from a shipping container, a team of only a few people, and a printer that jammed every other day. I almost laughed, but all I said was, yes, we're interested. Weeks later, I was at Westbrook's Seattle headquarters. The board sat in a long row, each in a crisp suit, stacks of proposals from top firms spread in front of them. I laid down ours, no glossy logos, no fancy graphics, just drawings and stories. I began with one simple line. A hotel is not just a place to sleep, it's a place where memories live. I told them about Tom and Linda's cabin. I showed photos of the old place and the new one, explaining every corner. The reading nook for Linda, the porch where Tom could fish. Then I said, if I could turn a small cabin into a place of comfort, I could turn your hotels into places people never forget. When I finished, the room went silent. Then one board member, a gray-haired man known as the toughest in the group, spoke. Carter, we've heard many presentations, but you're the first to put people before profit. He nodded. We'll work with you. I don't remember how I drove home that day. I only remember Rachel crying when she heard, and Caleb bouncing on the sofa yelling, Dad won. We hugged in our tiny living room, surrounded by piles of papers and half-eaten pizza boxes. The Westbrook contract changed everything. It lifted Carter Design Studio from a small name to a company that the entire industry noticed. We moved into a new office downtown, a glass space overlooking Elliott Bay. I hired more architects, engineers, and interior designers. Rachel officially became CFO with her own accounting team. From Seattle, we expanded to Denver, then San Diego. Each office displayed a framed photo of the lake cabin, a reminder of where it all began. One day, Entrepreneur Magazine called. They wanted to feature us, an architecture firm born from personal tragedy. I agreed on one condition, that they tell the truth, no sugarcoating. During the interview, they asked, what do you believe gives your company strength? I didn't hesitate. Blood doesn't define family. Presence does. That line was printed in bold across the front page. When the issue came out, our phones exploded. Investors, clients, and even architecture students sent messages. Some wrote, I grew up without family support, but reading your words, I feel less alone. I never expected those words to spread that far. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a slogan. It was the truth I had lived through, carved in blood and tears. When the company began to turn big profits, I thought of those nights in the hospital. I remembered the families I had seen in the hallways, their eyes mirroring my own from years before, terrified of losing a child because they couldn't afford the bill. I couldn't ignore them. So I created the Caleb Hope Fund, dedicated to children who needed heart surgery but had no insurance. We pledged a share of every new contract to the fund. The launch ceremony was held at a community center. Tom spoke, his voice shaky but steady. We once sold our cabin to save our grandson. Today, I'm proud to see my son-in-law turn that loss into hope for so many other children. I stood beside Rachel, holding Caleb's hand, my heart swelling with indescribable gratitude. The press covered it again, this time not just about a successful firm, but about a company with a heart. One headline read, A Business Built on Gratitude. I choked up reading it. As the company grew, Caleb grew too, strong and full of life. The scar on his chest faded to a faint pink line. He never hid it. In fact, he bragged, This is my superpower. I'm the real Iron Man. His classmates called him the Iron Kid. I saw that scar as a beacon, proof we had walked out of the shadows into the light. One evening I came home late from a meeting at the new office. Caleb was at his desk, sketching. He handed me a drawing of a skyscraper with a sign that read Carter Design Studio. On the rooftop, he had drawn a bright red heart. I asked, "Why the heart?" He grinned. "Because you build with heart, not just walls." I hugged my son, tears stinging my eyes. I knew then that we had been seen, not just by the industry or the press, but by the ones who mattered most. And once that light is lit, it will never stop spreading. The news didn't come from a major paper, but from a tiny column in a business magazine Rachel had left on the kitchen table. The article was barely half a page, yet it made me stop chewing my breakfast. Carter Holdings loses tens of millions in Florida coastal land deal. Market collapses, shareholders flee. Beneath it was a photo of my father, Richard, his face tight, looking at least 10 years older than the last time I saw him. I folded the magazine shut. Caleb ran past, showing off a new Lego creation. I smiled at him, but inside I felt something I couldn't name. The man who once checked his watch while I begged him to save my son's life was now on the news as a failure. Weeks later, I heard from an old friend. Ethan, my golden boy brother, had been fired from his luxury New York firm. Financial scandal, plus a ruined reputation after a project collapsed under his watch. Online chatter mocked him. Carter's golden boy was just a bubble. I wasn't surprised. I only felt a slow, steady sense of justice. Then one Saturday afternoon, while I was in a design meeting for a new children's hospital, a cream envelope showed up in my mailbox. On the front, in handwriting I knew too well, "The Carter family cordially invites Daniel and family to a reunion." I opened it, skimmed a few lines, and tore it up before stepping through the door. Rachel saw, didn't ask, she knew. I knew. There was no reunion. A few days later, my phone rang as I left our newly opened San Diego office, still glowing from signing 2 major contracts there. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. Curiosity made me answer. "Big brother." His voice was hoarse, stripped of arrogance. "I hear your company's doing well. I, I need a job. I know I've made mistakes, but I have experience and I could help." I let him speak a little longer, then pressed end. Not a word. I remembered his champagne toast that night, his smirk. "Maybe you should learn to manage your finances." Now the lesson had found him, and I didn't need to repeat it. More rumors leaked about my parents. Richard and Margaret Carter, once icons of Bellevue high society, were auctioning off possessions. The French wine collection, the paintings my mother flaunted, and even the grand piano Ethan used to play a few showy classics. People bought them cheap, just to brag that they owned Carter family relics. Then came the biggest rumor. The Tudor mansion itself was for sale. I looked at the real estate photo, the same house I had entered, drenched in rain, begging for $60,000. Now a for sale sign stood in front of rusted iron gates. The asking price was far below market value, proof of desperation. A colleague brought me the news, half grinning. "So, karma caught up. Thinking of buying it back, Daniel? Maybe turn it into Carter Design Studio Bellevue." I shook my head, smiling faintly. "I don't need those cold stone walls. We build new. We don't recycle the old." One evening, Rachel asked softly while folding laundry, "Do you feel happy hearing they've fallen?" I stayed quiet for a long time. Then I said, "Not happy, relieved, because I no longer carry the weight of proving myself to them. The world has revealed who they are." Caleb was 9 then, healthy and restless. One night he brought me a history book and asked, "Dad, not Dad, are Richard and Margaret Carter really our family?" His innocent question hit hard. I stroked his hair and answered slowly, "They gave birth to me, but family is who shows up when you need them. You have Tom and Speedy, you have Mom, you have me, you have this company. That's enough." Caleb nodded and went back to his math homework. His question was simple, but my answer was the truth I had spent a lifetime learning. In the months that followed, Carter Design Studio kept growing. We signed a contract with a major hospital, expanded Caleb's Hope Fund to cover more heart surgeries. My schedule blurred with work. But every so often, whispers from Bellevue reached me. Margaret is pawning jewelry. Richard is mortgaging his vintage car. Each layer of polish stripped away, leaving nothing but the shell. One winter night, I stood at my Seattle office window watching snow fall onto the streets. I remembered myself trembling in the rain, my mother's cold eyes, and my brother's laugh. Now it all replayed like an old film, and I realized I didn't need to take revenge. Time had done it for me, but deep down I knew one day they would come. Not to ask about Caleb's health, not to apologize. They would come to beg. I don't know what I'll do when that day arrives, but I know one thing: I'll never again be the son kneeling on the cold marble floor. That morning, Seattle's sky was unusually clear, sunlight pouring through the massive glass wall of my 18th floor office. The marble floor gleamed, the walnut desk shone, and on the wall hung blueprints of our latest projects. The Children's Hospital, the Community Library, the Westbrook Hotel nearing completion. The Carter Design Studio logo glowed under the sun. I sat behind the desk, slowly turning a Mont Blanc pen in my hand, Rachel's gift from the day we opened our first office. The intercom buzzed. My assistant's calm but hesitant voice came through. "Mr. Carter, there are two visitors. They say they're your parents." I set the pen down and drew a deep breath. "Send them in." The door opened, and there they were, Richard and Margaret Carter. I needed a few seconds to recognize them. The man who once strutted in bespoke suits now wore a sagging blazer, shoulders slumped, thinning gray hair. The woman who once glided across marble floors now clutched a cheap handbag, lipstick smeared, eyes bloodshot. They stepped in, eyes darting around the office they had once dismissed me from, overwhelmed and ashamed. "Daniel," my father began, trying to summon the old authority in his voice. But it was hoarse, fractured. "We need to talk." I gestured to the two chairs across the desk. They sat down in perfect unison, as if the habit had been drilled into them. The air thickened. I waited. My mother spoke first, her voice trembling. "Son, our family is in trouble. The bank, they're about to seize the house. We need $150,000 to cover the payment. If not, we'll lose everything." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Everything," I smirked. "You mean the mansion with crystal chandeliers and the piano Caleb was never allowed to sit beside?" Richard clenched his teeth, then sighed. "You don't understand. Times are hard. We helped you so much." I laughed, sharp as a blade. "Helped me. Do you want me to play it back for you?" I picked up my phone, tapped a few buttons, and set it on the desk. The sound filled the room as vivid as yesterday. My mother's voice. "We already spent $300,000 on the trip. Non-refundable." Then my father's. "Everyone is responsible for their choices." And Ethan's mocking laugh. "Maybe you should learn to manage money instead of ruining the party." The voices echoed against the bright walls. I locked eyes with them. Margaret covered her face, whispering, "Enough." Richard coughed, shoulders shaking. I stopped the recording and let the silence spread. Then I rose, walked to the side cabinet, and pulled out a black leather case. I set it on the desk, snapped it open. Neatly stacked bundles of cash gleamed inside. "You need $150,000. Here. Not a penny more." I shut the case and slid it across the table. "Enough to save the house. Not enough to buy me back." My father tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "No. Listen closely. That night I begged for my son's life. I knelt before you in front of dozens of guests. I thought blood meant more than a deposit for a vacation. I was wrong. Blood is just red running through veins. Family is the people who sold their cabin to save their grandson." My voice was steady, each word carved into the air. "From today on, I am no longer your son. And Caleb has no grandparents. It's over." Margaret broke down, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Richard reached for me, but I stepped back. His hands, once signing million-dollar deals, now trembled like those of a beggar. I turned toward the window, the city of Seattle alive below me. Towers, lights, projects Carter Design Studio had helped build. All proof that I had risen not because of them, but in spite of them. "I have another meeting," I said without turning. "Take the case and leave. This isn't forgiveness. This is the end." They stood slowly. Richard clutched the case like a lifeline. Margaret stumbled, her eyes swollen. They shuffled out, small and diminished, stripped of their glory. The door closed behind them. I stood still, palm resting on the cool surface of my desk. No applause, no audience, only silence and the feeling that a chain I had carried for years had finally snapped. I turned back to my desk, hand-brushing the photo of Caleb grinning beside Tom and Linda at our Denver office opening. I whispered, barely audible, as if to myself, "At last, I'm free." That afternoon, I left the office with a strange feeling. Not joy, not sorrow, just a light emptiness, like someone had finally unchained my neck after decades. The Seattle sky glowed orange and gold, sunlight spilling across the car windows as I drove home to the sound of laughter and the smell of baking waiting for me. In the backyard, Rachel had hung balloons of every color. Caleb ran circles with a paper birthday hat sliding off his head, laughing loud and free. Tom tended the grill, flipping burgers with his rough hands. Linda laid out desserts on the long wooden table, fussing as she worked. "Daniel, leave the office at the office. Today belongs to Caleb." I nodded, and I meant it. As the sun dipped, everyone gathered around the table. Caleb drew a deep breath before the heart-shaped cake. He made a wish, blew out the candles, and smoke curled into the soft May evening. Applause filled the yard, simple and complete. After the cake, Caleb ran off and returned with a sheet of paper hidden behind his back. "Daddy, I drew this for you." On the page were 5 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. Mommy, Daddy, Caleb, Grandpa Tom, Grandma Linda. I searched for Richard and Margaret, but they weren't there. No Tudor mansion, no crystal chandeliers, just a simple wooden cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. My chest ached, then warmed. I knelt and hugged him. "You drew it perfectly, Caleb," he grinned. I drew our family. That night, we drove to the new cabin Tom and Linda had just moved into, the one I built after promising to give back the dream they once sacrificed. This time I doubled it. Wider porches, bigger windows, and space enough for everyone. Tom showed me his new fishing setup, Linda pulled Rachel toward the sunlit kitchen, and Caleb shouted across the yard, "This is the real grandparents' house." We ate dinner on the porch as fireflies flickered across the lake and crickets sang in the dark. Rachel leaned against me. Caleb fell asleep in Linda's lap, clutching his drawing, and Tom raised a glass of soda with a gentle smile. The boy will remember nights like this, not the things money buys. I met his eyes and nodded. So will I. In that moment, it was clear. Inheritance wasn't the mansion on the auction block or the 6-figure vacations. Real inheritance was what you leave in the hearts of others, presence, sacrifice, and love you choose to give. I thought of Richard and Margaret walking out of my office, clutching that suitcase like a lifeline. They had lost their mansion, their status, and now their son. I had what they never truly were. I had Tom and Linda, who gave up their cabin to save their grandson. I had Rachel, who sold her Mustang without hesitation. I had Caleb, a boy with a scar on his chest and a smile brighter than the sun. Later, when everyone had gone inside, I sat on the porch staring at the lake reflecting the stars. My chest was calm, no urge left to prove myself, only the need to hold this moment. I pulled out a small notebook and wrote, "Inheritance, not money, not houses, not reputation. Inheritance is showing up." Tom and Linda taught me that. Rachel and Caleb remind me every day. This is family. I closed the notebook just as Rachel stepped out, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She sat beside me, leaned on my arm. "What are you thinking?" I squeezed her hand and smiled. "That we already have everything, and I need nothing else." That night, the cabin glowed warm against the dark, light spilling from the windows. Inside, Caleb slept with his drawing beside his pillow. I knew it wasn't just a child's sketch. It was proof of the only legacy I wanted to leave. A chosen family, a real one. Some nights, I still stay late at the office. Golden lights spilling across the desk while Seattle sparkles outside the window. At times, the old memories surface again. That rainy night when I knelt on cold marble, begging my parents to save Caleb's life. That memory never disappears. It lingers like a scar, just like the one across my son's chest. But now it no longer makes me tremble. It only reminds me of one truth. Revenge isn't watching them collapse. It's building a happiness they can never touch. Richard and Margaret lost their mansion, lost their reputation. Ethan is no longer the golden boy. All they have left are each other and empty suitcases. I don't need to strike another blow. Time has already. I chose another road. To build a life that is warm, steady, and full of love. I learned a truth worth more than any million-dollar contract. Family isn't who gave you blood, it's who stands beside you when the storm hits. Tom and Linda proved that by selling the cabin they built with their own hands to save Caleb. Rachel proved it when she sold her Mustang, 10 years of memories, without hesitation. Caleb proves it every day when he looks at me with trust that never wavers. When Entrepreneur magazine featured my company, they marveled at the new offices and big contracts. But what makes me proud isn't that. It's the day one health insurance for my employees. It's the Caleb Hope Fund, saving children who need heart surgery. It's Caleb's crayon drawings, always with Grandpa Tom and Grandma Linda at his side. That is legacy. If you ask me whether I regret anything, the answer is no. I don't regret the years on my knees. I don't regret that night in the rain. Because from the bottom, I finally saw who was truly family. And from the bottom, I learned how to climb back up and rebuild everything. Maybe you've lived through betrayals like this. Maybe from blood relatives, maybe from friends, maybe from coworkers. And maybe you thought revenge meant making them suffer the way you did. But the truth is sometimes the strongest and quietest revenge is simply living better. Building joy they can never claim. They collapse under their own choices. You keep moving forward without looking back. So if you're listening and you feel that ache because you see yourself in this story, remember, you are not alone. Thousands have been betrayed and have stood up again. And often silence and truth are the most powerful weapons. The message I leave is clear. Family is not who gave you life, but who chooses to stand with you when the storm comes. Have you ever been betrayed by your own blood? Share your story in the comments and tell me where you were watching from. Texas, California, New York, or anywhere in the world. If you believe silence and truth always win, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. This is where silent revenge stories are told, where traitors fall apart on their own, and those once cast aside find their worth again. Together, let's build a community where scars are not marks of failure, but symbols of hope.